So does anybody know what this background picture is to start with? No. So this is a famous place in the core of New Orleans in the French Quarter. It's called Café du Monde, and it is they have a factoid that's not exactly correct, but they basically say it's been continuously open since they opened it. I don't remember the year. I forget, 1850 or something like that, 1880, something like that. This is a place that makes only beignets. You guys know what beignets are? Beignets are these fried donut-like things with usually with powdered sugar on the top. All this place does is serve beignets and coffee and chicory coffee and lemonade. And maybe hot chocolate. I can't remember. That's it. So years ago, I was there, and I was maybe, it was late at night, and maybe I was hungry. And I went in there and said, "I'd like some ice cream." And he said, "Yes, sir. All we have is beignets, coffee, da-da-da." I said, "Yeah, okay. Oh, I guess you can get I think you can get a Coke there, I think." And I said, "Yeah, I'd like just some ice cream." Like, "Yes, sir. All we have is beignets." So Café du Monde actually did shut down in the wake of Hurricane Katrina for a short period. So that's why I say it hasn't technically been continuously operating. But it's open 24 hours, and it's open all the time. So during the peak times, the line will go for a long ways. And in the low times, at about 4 in the morning or so, you can kind of just walk up and buy stuff. But we'll definitely have some beignets there at some point. But that's a classic example of Louisiana food culture in this case. The establishment of so this picture on the top, this perspective map, I like it a lot. Normally we're looking straight down, but in this case we have a perspective as if we're in a hot air balloon. In this case, we're to the south of the city of New Orleans, and we're looking north across the Mississippi River into the old square, the Vieux Carré, the French, what we now call the French Quarter, or the Quarter, as people call it. And have a look. So this is from 1726, and what you see there is you guys tell me, what do you see? What can we tell about this landscape from this photo, or from this illustration? It's flat, good, yeah, so super flat, excellent.
I'm looking at smoke signals there.
So yeah, so on the bank that we're standing on, it's all cleared, right? Mm-hmm. There aren't a lot of trees, and so there's some kind of activity, a little hard to tell possibly, but it looks like somebody's burning something, some kind of industry. Okay, what else? Is that the river? The river is right. Yeah, so this is the river. So the river's actually, it's flowing from here, going past the city, and then going out to the right, to the Gulf of Mexico.
So the boats are on land? Or is the river green? Oh.
This is Green River. This is the river. This is the river right here. All this here, river. So it's really wide. So here's the land where the smoke stuff is going on. So this little lip here is the edge of the bank.
Is that all trees around them?
Yes, check it out. It's all trees, right? It's this little chunk cut out of big swamp, big cypress, tupelo, big giant tall trees, big thick trees. Good. So this area wants to be swamp. It wants to be wetland. Cool. What else? Anything else you guys can tell from this photo?
Is that like the ocean behind it?
Ooh, is it the ocean behind it? To the north of the city of New Orleans? No. What is it, Angie?
Oh, it's the...
Like Pontchartrain.
Yeah, like Pontchartrain. Pontchartrain, like Pontchartrain. So that's what we're looking at. So this area out here is this what seems to be the ocean. Huge swath of water, but it's technically an embayment. Okay, cool. So that's good. And then what's right here?
Is that a levee?
Not a levee. A channel, right? So it's a drainage canal. So that's something that we're, again, recall, this is at sea level. Pontchartrain is at sea level. The river is higher than sea level because the river is gravity feeding down to the ocean. And so if we want to drain the city, let's say if it rains or whatever, if we dug a trench and we started right up near the edge of the river here where it's the highest elevation, it's going to drain down, gravity drain down into the ocean / Lake Pontchartrain. That's a drainage canal. Cool? So already way back when in the early 1700s, we can tell that this is still a swamp-dominated area, wooded-dominated area. The river is central to what's going on, at least in this artist rendition, right? The river is the front and center thing. The city's almost like a backdrop to the goings-on. And also, I like this image because, relatively speaking, it's a little speck in a big, bad wilderness, right? So we have our little encampment, but it's surrounded by trees. It's surrounded by nature. It's surrounded by wild. And so that's important to think about when the folks were founding this. Okay, obviously the first human inhabitants of this area were the Native Americans. And the first tribes that settled here at least 10,000 years before present. It's a bit more challenging than some of the archaeology that we have here in California, simply because it is so wet and flooded. It's harder to find these outcrops with persistent, say, middens or other things. So archaeology is a bit more challenging there than, say, in coastal California or on our Channel Islands. But what is quite clear is that the Mississippi was not just a major transportation hub for the European settlers and folks that came afterwards, but the native peoples really used this waterway as a major way to move around. So that was super keen. How do we know where? So why is New Orleans where New Orleans is? New Orleans is where New Orleans is because Pontchartrain is nearby. So New Orleans is close to a portage, which is a place where you get out of a water body and go across some land to get either back into that water body or to another one. And so essentially, New Orleans is this pinch point, this relatively narrow point between the Mississippi River and Lake Pontchartrain. Lake Pontchartrain, big, huge ocean, but contained, remember? It's in this little pocket. So it's not as stormy as the ocean. So you have all the marine things you'd have in the ocean, things like clams, things like fish, but it's a much more chill environment to navigate and move around on average. And so therefore it was a great fishing ground. So this was a natural portage where Native Americans that were using the river to go up and down, right? We said it's a highway, go up and down. When they would want to get out and go get some cool marine fish, marine species, this is a place they would easily cross. So that's one of the reasons why New Orleans is where New Orleans is. The area that we call New Orleans was first settled. It was actually about 60 miles south or so. It's unclear exactly, but a bit south of the present city of New Orleans. And this was founded by an French explorer who was coming down from Canada and elsewhere, named Iberville. And you'll see a street named after. Many of these explorers and early folks have been immortalized with different street names and place names in New Orleans. This is Iberville. So he camped there on March 3rd, just before the 1700s, 1699, and he remembered that it was just about a week or so before this big festival called Mardi Gras, and so they called it essentially Mardi Gras Point. So even before we have the city of New Orleans, we have Mardi Gras in there. So Merry Christmas. So I mentioned that New Orleans is a portage to get to Lake Pontchartrain, so that's key. The other thing is so these are explorers now. These are explorers looking for commerce, trade routes, thinking of purchasing furs, selling furs, that kind of stuff, transactional type stuff. And so when they first were down near the Bird's Foot Delta, down near the mouth of the Mississippi River, it's really muddy, right? It's really low. And they might be okay for a while, and then a winter storm comes and so these guys were moving up the Mississippi River to find a place where it didn't flood seasonally, to find a place where they were essentially protected from the vagaries of the ocean and could remain dry all year round to build an encampment, a settlement, a trading post. And that was also near New Orleans. That's this Point Mardi Gras. Because of the crescent city, right, the big bend in the river, these guys also recall their vessels are primarily either being moved by paddle or gravity, the current taking them down, or if we're going upriver, we're primarily relying on sails. And again, when the river is going to the right and going to the left, it's a really hard procedure, so you can't go quickly. So bends in the river are really key, because when the folks that are coming up river to maybe attack your settlement, for example, they can't go super fast if there's a bend. So by definition, a bend, you kind of have the folks that are on land have the advantage. So it was a very desirous place from a very defensible standpoint, from a defensive point of view. Okay, Bienville, who's Iberville's brother, next comes on the scene and founds what we now consider to be the city of New Orleans in 1718. So this is going to be a trading port, trading post, and we're going to put it here and ready, set, go, and there's been a city there ever since. Now this is, right, late 1600s, early 1700s. This is really, you guys ever heard the term the Great Game? You guys know what that refers to? No history majors in here? No. Everybody's quickly saying no. So the Great Game refers to Russia and Great Britain and some of the sort of European power machinations where these empires are fighting against other empires and all this kind of stuff, and it's couched as the Great Game when in reality people are slaughtering each other. But this is essentially what we're talking about is the American version of that. So it's still in the grip of all these colonial powers, and everybody's trying to get more land than the other country, and they're trying to have their forces do this and that. So it's a lot of positioning, and New Orleans is at the center of a lot of that dynamic nature, 1700s. Probably the most defining aspect of the city of New Orleans through history is this notion of shifting, of changing. There's this constant mix of stuff. Shifting in terms of what nation state controls the area, shifting in terms of what groups of people are coming in, shifting in terms of what cultural influences are running the show. So New Orleans is really this mixing pot, right? Really this gumbo, this so-called stew, this sort of throw everything in there and create something new place in what will become the United States of America. Right? The term the New World. This is New Orleans in 1744. We can see 30 odd years after we've established it, we now have this rigorous grid system, and there's now properties and everything's starting to get built up. And we had lots of periods of things getting ripped down. So there were a series of fires, sometimes called Great Fires, sometimes called Great Conflagrations. This is perhaps one of the most famous ones. This is 1788, and no fire department here, right? This is simple materials, stuff we've oftentimes pulled out of the swamp. Recall that there is no rock around. This is all depositional stuff. This is all sediment, silts upon silts upon silts upon silts. It's very, 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 very hard to find rock. In fact, one of the main so when we make concrete, we need to mix some type of aggregate in there, right? Typically, what we do is people mix crushed rock, right? That's sort of one of the big constituents. We make cement. Ain't no cement down there in New Orleans. So one of the things was see people putting on roads, initially just throwing it on and then eventually fold it into different mixtures, is actually from Lake Pontchartrain, we just dredge up these shells, these mollusk shells. And that's one of the hardest things, consistently easy to find around hard things, right? Rock is really, really hard. You have to go hundreds of feet down or deeper into the sediment upon sediment upon sediment to find bedrock and stuff. So it's hard to find hard stuff. So especially early on, what do we build the town out of? Well, we built the town out of wood because there were trees around, all that kind of stuff. What that meant was a lot of this stuff was flammable. These folks are living close together. And so when fire could come in, it could be hugely devastating. And that's, for example, what happened here in 1788. As I said, shifting alliances, shifting control. Starts with Bienville, and he founds, as we said, the city that becomes New Orleans and has been continuously occupied ever since. A little bit afterwards, this Catholic priest comes through in 1721, and there's only a couple years after the founding of the city, remember. And he describes it as a place of 100 wretched hovels in a malarious, wet thicket of willows and dwarf palmettos. Palmettos are like little teeny tiny palm trees. Infested by serpents and alligators. And that sounds pretty much right? So this is seen as a place that's scary. This is seen as a place that's dominated by wetlands. This is seen as a place that's humid. Malarial, we're talking about disease, right? Wetland diseases, things spread by mosquitoes. People, all kinds of epidemics, yellow fever, all these outbreaks. People, recall, this is back in the era, we don't know what causes illness. A lot of the thought is it has to do with the, quote, bad air, the bad airs, bad vapors, swamp gas. So the thought was, hey, how you combat that is you have an open house or an open room, and you let the air kind of move through and clean it out, right? That just allows the mosquitoes to come in, right? So that notion of disease and threat and wetland as danger is very, very much so the case there. Always moist, right? We're in a wetland. The roads are kind of always muddy and vaguely, even in the dry season, they're kind of, ushy and gushy. By 1722, the French have made this their capital in this region of the New World. So this is now a supposed political center, although it's not particularly large. We have the first hurricane that comes through and impacts the city in 1722, and then people say, hey, we can't have these ramshackle random houses. We need to have things in a rigid grid system. That's what first lays out the first modern street layout in the city of New Orleans, and that's why we go to the French Quarter. You'll see it's very easy to figure out where you are. It's very X and Y. It's very north, south, east, west type of goings on. The French get in a war with the Spanish, and at the end of that, 1763, New Orleans is ceded over to Spanish control. So we start off with Native American cultures dominating, then the French come in, now we have the Spanish coming in. Generally speaking, the people didn't change, just the government changed. So just because a new government came in, by and large, people didn't up and move and leave. They just stayed. They just suddenly became French citizens, or they suddenly became Spanish citizens, right? And so you'll see this theme over and over again as we're walking around, as we're talking to Michael at the cooking school, etc. Yes. Okay. So this becomes Spanish territory in 1763. A Spanish governor doesn't show up till 1766. Right? This is not internet age, right? So people, again, the city is kind of doing its own due, right? And then every once in a while somebody comes in and says, shakes their finger at them and goes, you people should be doing it like this. And people are like, oh. Right? We have that fire, which is the background picture I have here in 1788. That's why New Orleans looks the way it looks to you. Because in the wake of that fire, people said, okay, that's it. No more. We can't do this wood stuff. We need to rebuild with brick. That's why the French Quarter looks so cool. Wrought iron, that's why we have that look. That's why New Orleans Square in Disneyland looks the way it looks. Walt Disney loved New Orleans. He wanted to build Disneyland in what's called New Orleans East. That was his plan. And the corrupt city fathers of New Orleans said, oh yeah, we're gonna take this guy for all his money. Yeah, okay, you want to build your Disneyland thing, your theme park here? Sure, dude. Here's how you have to pay this guy off, you have to pay this guy off, you have to pay this guy off. So Walt Disney said, screw you, and he left, and he went to Anaheim. And he built Disneyland in Anaheim. That's why it's there. But that's why there's a New Orleans Square. Right? There isn't a New York Square. There isn't a San Francisco Square. There's a New Orleans Square because Walt Disney really loved the look and the character of the French Quarter. So that's why the Haunted Mansion is there and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so flash forward to the Louisiana Purchase. So then the French take over New Orleans again, and then Napoleon's in charge. And Napoleon loves to have wars. Napoleon really gets off and killing people and doing stuff like that, right? He loves being emperor, little dude. And so he suddenly realizes, oh my God, I'm out of money. I need some Skrilla, as the kids say. And so he's trying to figure out what to do. I don't know. Hey, let's call those crazy wacko American dudes, right? Hey, you guys, you wanna? How about you wanna buy some land? Because I need some cash. And so that is what we now call the Louisiana Purchase. Incredibly, the best land deal in history. There's a couple contenders for that, but I would argue this is probably the best land deal. So here we are. So Jefferson is our president. Jefferson buys this, and people at first say, what, you idiot? We got taken, right? Nobody had seen this place, had no idea what it was. Almost all of the all the American colonies are hugging the eastern seaboard, right? People don't really go past the Ohio Valley very much. So this thing that went from the swampy lands where it's really scary and there's weird people down there, goes all the way up to the Pacific Northwest where there's condors and weird mythical creatures and things and killer whales. What? So this is a flour sack actually from, it says purchase apron, but I think it was a flour sack. That I like this map. It's hard to find a good map of Louisiana Purchase. I like this map. But essentially the dark blue hatch thing, that was the Louisiana Purchase. Check it out. It goes all the way from the mouth of the Mississippi all the way up to what we now call Oregon and Washington. Huge swath of land. So that's where Thomas Jefferson creates the so-called Corps of Discovery with Lewis and Clark, and they're charged with going and exploring. Imagine that. A president who was a scientist and who embraced exploration and understanding new cultures and things. So he sent these guys out, and this was all the talk of the town. These guys would go contact Native American tribes. We'd give them a medallion from the president and said, yeah, we want to be friends. That was a big lie, but that's another story, right? So we give them medallions, and they collected specimens. They had illustrators. We made journals. We took samples. We took, in some cases, live animals and shipped them back. In other cases, we killed animals, prepped their skins, saved them. Animal seeds and plant pressings, all kinds of fantastic stuff, all the way up to the Pacific Northwest. Fantastic deal. Jefferson paid $15 million in 1803 for this Louisiana Purchase. And people, this was a huge scandal. People, are you insane? In today's dollars, that would be about $1/3 of $1 billion. It would be about a little north of $300 million, which is a lot of money, to be sure. But if we put it on a per unit area basis, that's about $149 per square kilometer for over 2 million square kilometers. Or if you prefer miles, not quite a million square miles. That's a massive deal, right? Again, there's all kinds of issues here about the Native Americans didn't think they were giving their land up, but that's, again, another story. But you guys get the idea. So this dramatically expanded the size, overnight expanded the size and the reach and the potential subsequent expansion of the young United States of America. And it turned out to be, again, just some pure real estate deals, brilliant move by Jefferson. Another thing that we have to talk about when we're talking about the history of New Orleans, in addition to all this wonderful mixing that's going on, right? Let's not be Pollyannish about this. That wasn't all awesome. There were all kinds of challenges that came along with this. Challenges with disenfranchised people, challenges with people that did not have equal standing in our society at the time, etc. So remember that New Orleans is founded outside the norm. It's these weirdos that go to this faraway land, right? There are these folks that are cool with living in a swamp, right? These folks that are cool with living in an area where their government doesn't necessarily know who they are or have strong control. So these are rebels. These are charlatans. These are moneymakers. These are pirates. These are all those kinds of folks, right? But still, the Mississippi River is still this massive transportation hub. So even though we have this what you might call den of ill repute or whatever, right? These kind of crazy people, there's all kinds of goods moving up and down. So there's all kinds of transactions that are happening. So even though these guys are out in the middle of the swamp, some people there have nice silk and have china plates, and so it's this very interesting mix of out in the middle of nowhere, but a lot of things are going up and past, especially in the wake of the Louisiana Purchase, because now the Americans are moving up, and the Americans are moving up and down this aquatic highway of the 1800s. So pretty early on, the powers that be take to, as with other areas of our world, move to institutionalizing the haves and the have-nots as a way to hang on to power, as a way to control and exert influence. And one of the easiest ways to do that is with how people look. And so people build all these prejudices and slavery and all that kind of stuff into what's going on. What we see in the background here is a slave auction. A slave auction where folks that have been captured from Africa and brought against their will here are being sold off. I'd misspelled primogenitor, so sorry. Another example of some of the strangeness is we'll hear more about this when we're there, but some of the funky French laws. We don't have counties in Louisiana. We have counties in New Mexico. We have counties in New York. We have counties in California. The only state in the Union that doesn't have counties is Louisiana. They have parishes. Because the legal system in New Orleans, the federal system is the federal system, but the state system of laws, that's based on Napoleonic law, Napoleonic code. Everywhere else in the U.S. is built on British law, right? So our Great Britain parents left us with this code of British law. Not these guys. These guys have this French law. And so one of the interesting aspects of that is that the firstborn is in control of stuff. Elsewhere, that would be the firstborn male. But here, if the firstborn is a woman, no other guys, whatever, it's okay, man, you're in control. So women had a disproportionate, again, I'm not trying to say it was perfect, but compared to other places at this time in North America, women had the potential to control plantations, to control businesses, to control wealth that they didn't in other places. We'll save the Plessy versus Ferguson for a second. So this is another example of the the legacy of this injustice. We can look at a lot of stuff, but we'll just do one here real quickly, and that is the famous case of Plessy versus Ferguson. Have you guys heard of Plessy versus Ferguson? A few people? Not so much? Okay, so this is a famous legal case, and this is a marker where Homer Plessy was arrested that marks the spot. This is what happened. 1890, the state of Louisiana creates the so-called Separate Car Act. This refers to rail cars, trolleys and rail cars and railroads and stuff. And what it says is, hey, you white folks, you can't be sleeping, sitting in a black car and vice versa, right? So as with so many things, Rosa Parks, so many things in our history where it looks like someone stood up and did a brave stance to thwart some evil doing, and it was these things were brave stances, but more often than not, they weren't some random act. They were planned, and that's the case in the situation here. So Homer Plessy wasn't some random guy. We had this so-called Citizens Committee. This was, we'll talk more about categories in a second, but this is Creole, black, white. These guys got together and they said, you know what, we want to break down this racial law thing. So they got Mr. Plessy. Mr. Plessy was an octoroon, meaning he was 7/8 European, 1/8 black. But in the South, that's all that mattered. It wasn't pure white, right? And so he went on to this. So he bought a ticket. He bought a ticket for the white car, and first a ticket. And he went in and he sat in that place where he bought the tickets. And sure enough, somebody came up. Hey man, you can't sit here. You have to go to the other car. And he said, dude, I got a ticket. Maybe he didn't say dude, but he said, yeah, I got a ticket. I said, yeah, okay, fine. So long story short, gets arrested, and it is argued in the courts. So it was designed to be a test case, right? And the idea was to get this racist law, this 1890 state law of the state of Louisiana, thrown out of court, declared unconstitutional. One of the massive black eyes in the legal history, there are many, but one of the very, very glaring, what we now see is very glaring black eyes in the U.S. legal system. So it goes all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court says, you know what, that's cool. And so they codify what comes to be known as separate but equal. So the idea would be, well, if there were no seats, I guess the guy could sit there. But you know what? There are some seats over there. And there's the exact same seat. Same thing. It's just that's for black people, that's for white people. So therefore it's cool, right? We know in reality they're not the same. And more importantly, the very act of trying to divide people based on how they look or whatever is in and of itself an injustice and a way to divide us and separate us. Way too much going on in this country right now about dividing us and separating us, not enough about trying to pull us together. This law is all about pushing us apart, as are all the race-based laws and stuff. And so this becomes the law of the land of the United States of America, home of the free, land of the brave, all that stuff. It's okay to have a drinking fountain for people whose skin tone is a little bit darker than somebody else's, whose hair is a little different than somebody else's. And this, unfortunately, becomes law and stays law of the land until Brown versus Board of Education, until 1954, where a gentleman that will argue the case that will then go on to become a Supreme Court justice argues successfully that in terms of education, there's no such thing as separate but equal, right? And so this helps usher in the modern civil rights movement and the drive for equality and constitutional amendments and the Voting Rights Act and all that kind of stuff. So New Orleans has a front and center seat to this show. So even though New Orleans, a lot of racism and all that kind of stuff, note this was an attempt in the late 1800s to try to break that control. Okay, so there we go. Let's shift gears. Mardi Gras. Okay, so that's the background for Mardi Gras. All this stuff, all the mixing of different cultures, the racism, all that stuff comes together, and has produced what we now call Mardi Gras, or what my friends call the season. So Mardi Gras is also known as Fat Tuesday, and it's always on a Tuesday, and that's because it's the day right before Ash Wednesday. So Ash Wednesday is this is the start of the most important season for Christians, which is when Jesus. Basically, it's a time of reflection leading up to the crucifixion of Jesus. So during Lent, which is a time to sacrifice, right? I don't drink soda during Lent, so it's a major sacrifice for me. So people give up stuff, right? Sometimes people don't eat certain foods. Kids give up candy, that kind of stuff. And so it's not meant to be needless suffering. It's meant to try to put you in a more contemplative place. So this comes from Catholic countries. This comes from Catholic Europe. And we have Mardi Gras in other Catholic-dominated areas around the world. You guys have heard of Carnival. Carnival is Brazil's version of Mardi Gras. Same exact thing. Same exact thing. They just have less clothes and more samba. Again, this is spread in Catholic-dominated areas. So there's other areas around Mobile and other places in the South that also have their own Mardi Gras, but it's just not as famous as what goes on in New Orleans. Okay, so this is matching up as with most Catholic events. It sort of is agglomerated on top of a pagan thing, on top of a non-Christian holiday season, and that's what happened. That's what happened in this case. It's dominated, but the version that we see in New Orleans is dominated by people dressing up. So that comes in different versions. You can dress up as totally crazy things. You can dress up as a formal mask in a pretty ball gown and that kind of stuff. But it's this notion of having some amount of freedom by putting on a costume or putting on a character, right? So that gives you some level of freedom, right? To act silly, to act like it's not yourself. And you can imagine, why might this be a big hit in a city where there's lots of mosquitoes flying around, lots of racial injustice, lots of crazy crooks and beggars and everybody going around. Right? So this becomes more and more of a thing. More and more of a thing. It grows every year. And the history of Mardi Gras is the history of different political powers that are in play trying to destroy Mardi Gras. Right? So it's this, oh my God, this is debauchery and evil and badness. We got to stop it. Okay, let me finish up. I don't think I did this. So Ash Wednesday is the start of Lent, 40 days of Lent, the end of which is Easter. Okay, so Easter is always on a Sunday. So Ash Wednesday is on a Wednesday. So Fat Tuesday is the last day to fatten up before you have to, not eat as much and sacrifice. So come Ash Wednesday, you got to be all quiet, you got to have your hands in your lap, and you got to be real somber. Fat Tuesday is the last day to party before you have to not party for 40 days, right? So that's the context. So we talk about Mardi Gras, but our friends talk about the Mardi Gras season. That really starts at Epiphany, which is 12 days after Christmas, and it just has been going on ever since. And we'll talk about crews and things in a second, but there's different parades, balls, etc. that happen on certain days, and we peak on Mardi Gras. We peak on Fat Tuesday. Everything's building to Fat Tuesday. So Fat Tuesday in New Orleans is an official holiday. There's no school, there's no nothing, except for drinking and things. So I mentioned before that there's this, again, this history of, oh man, these people are getting together, it's not good. So the first clear attempt to ban Mardi Gras is 1781, and it's these slave people are kind of mixing with these white people, like nothing good can come of that. So, we got to, clamp that down, and people are getting drunk, that's not good, right? So all that stuff. By the 1800s, first the Spanish and then the Americans later, they tried their hand at outlawing this, and pretty much people don't care, and they just keep doing it. And it eventually spreads to a 7-month-long season until people kind of start to get it under control in the mid 1800s. There are many aspects of Mardi Gras, but perhaps some of the most visible are the crews and the parades. So crews spelled with a K, and the parades. So crews are groups of folks that come together to do marching and or put on a parade. And the idea here is this originally was a response to these folks trying to crack down. So instead of just people doing random parties, it's like, look, hey, this is an organized thing, right? Check it out. We're all good, right? We're behaving. And, sort of a kind of two-faced, yeah, we're behaving, but then we're throwing out, trinkets and all that kind of good stuff. So this is one of my favorite illustrations from Harper's Weekly in 1876, and this is not of a parade. This is of a ball, right? So parades are one aspect, masked balls are another. Originally, these were all very sort of high-end, elegant, tuxedo and floor-length dresses kind of stuff. In recent times, those have evolved. And there are those, but there's also the crazy, wacky, insane, tattooed and pierced balls and all that kind of stuff. But have a look at this. So this is late 1800s. We have strange costumes, elaborate costumes. We have people dressed up like, sea people. Here's a snail devil thing. I don't know what that's going on there. Some kind of potato man thing. I don't know, what. So a lot of the imagery is borrowed from mythology. So Greek mythology, other poems and things. And then again, so there's the ball, and then there's the parade aspect. And so this is the parades where folks are going down main thoroughfares in town, and they're doing things. And so they've evolved over time. But as I said, so the Mardi Gras season starts on Epiphany. Anybody know what Epiphany is? That's the day the wise men supposedly get to Jesus and give him the frankincense and myrrh and stuff. So that's the end of the Christmas season. So we all respectful and everything, baby Jesus, and then wise men, now we can party. Is the idea. Okay, so the crews are social clubs, and again, these guys are the organizers of most of the endeavors in and around Mardi Gras. So there are many, many, many different crews, and they some of them have only been around for a decade or two. Others have been around forever. So some of the most famous ones I list here: Babylon, Bacchus, Comus, Zulu, and Rex. These are going to be the more famous parades. These are going to be the more elaborate displays on the floats. As here you see a float right here. Modern aspects of these parades include throws. So throws are things that the people that are marching, either marching alongside or on the float, are going to throw to people. So this started way back when with coins, and then they evolved into chocolates, and now there's all kinds of crazy stuff. So there are a whole variety of things that can be thrown. Some crews throw pineapples. Some crews throw potatoes. Some crews throw, what else they throw? Coconuts. I mean, there's so some of the throws you catch are just little plastic baubles. Other things you got to be careful because you can get hit in the head and take you out. And so that's where you get the famous saying. People say, "Throw me something, mister." So the people on the side of the street watching the parade say, "Hey, throw me something," and then usually they will. Sometimes people want something, and so while this is not the normal Mardi Gras thing, right? In the sort of frat boy version, and in some situations, the idea is, hey, I want to see some skin, and then I'll throw you something, right? So that is sort of the lore of Mardi Gras, and that definitely happens. Of course, that happens. But really, Mardi Gras is a much more complex thing. And so you guys will watch our friend Harry Shearer's documentary about what happened with Hurricane Katrina. And when a few years ago, were doing a symposium on this, Harry kindly allowed us to show his film. So we did a screening of his film. And then we had all these people piling into Aliso 100. And so I had the brilliant idea, we'll just put the movie on, and we'll put the DVD on, and push play. And so while people are coming in the seat, it'll be kind of go in the background. That's great. Well, apparently whoever started at the very, very beginning of the film. And how the film starts is it's a documentary on what happened with Hurricane Katrina and the Army Corps of Engineers. And so the very first start is Harry walking through New Orleans going, hey, city of New Orleans. And, everybody knows New Orleans. Everybody knows New Orleans from Mardi Gras. And then our then provost comes walking down the aisle to introduce this big meeting we're having, and all these overflowing reporters and everything. And so on the big screen in Aliso Hall, I was seeing this big lady's like, hey, draw me something. And she lifts up her shirt, and there's she flashes the crowd. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. Pause, DVD. And then, our provost came and said, I see Sean is involved with this thing. So that does happen. But as with many things, it's much more complex than that. And it's not some silly frat boy party. There's aspects to that, but that is really a fraction. Really, Mardi Gras is a much more important thing than just people being silly. Again, so there's throws, there's balls, where people are typically costumed. Some of these are humorous themed, some of them are satirical, some of them are just dressed elegantly. It's a whole range of stuff. And then, really key, is the music. So all of these parades are going to have music, and various versions. But this is the first place where we've talked about second line brass bands. So these are a tradition in New Orleans that have to do with Mardi Gras, but also go way beyond Mardi Gras. These are essentially the boom boxes of the day. So this was to announce something was happening. So as folks are walking around, maybe it's a wedding, maybe you're going to a wedding, maybe it's a funeral, maybe we're taking someone from the church to go bury him, right? First is going to come the bride and groom, or the casket, or whatever it is, right? The important people. And then in the second line come the musicians. So that's when you guys hear second line, with that's equivalent to a brass band. So people playing these brassy instruments that are relatively loud, that carry the sound far, and that's where we have the basis of our second line bands. Different groups, a couple different terms, cultural terms and things you guys should know about. First is Cajuns. So Cajuns are the descendants of the Acadians. So these are French-speaking Canadians. They are living up in Canada, and then the Brits kick their butt, and the British take over Canada, and they don't trust the French. So they basically pick them up and put them on a boat and ship them down south. But instead of taking them and dumping off all these people in, say, New Orleans or someplace in Florida or whatever, they think these French people are crafty. They don't trust them. So instead of dumping them all off, they sprinkle them. They salt and pepper them across the south, across the greater Louisiana coast, the northern Gulf of Mexico. And they drop 50 here, and they sail 20 miles farther down. They let 40 go here, and they sail 20. What the idea was, we don't want them to come together and regroup and then come back up to Canada and attack the British, was the idea. And that happened in 1775. And so these are the country folk, basically, of Louisiana. So these are folks that live in the swamp, historically, not in the big city. Their music is dominated by Zydeco. So Zydeco is Louisiana country music, basically. It's dance music, right? Dominated by the fiddle and the accordion. You see the accordion right here. And washboard is a really, really common instrument. Zicka, 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 zicka. That sound. Their food tends to be really spicy. They have all these peppers and stuff they like to grow. Tabasco sauce, right? That comes from the swamps of Louisiana. So spicy food, and a lot of rice dishes because these guys are out in the wetlands where they can grow wild rice. So spicy rice dishes, classic Cajun food. And to this day, they speak a dialect of French that French people have a real hard time understanding, but it basically is a dialect of French. Cool. Here's a swamp lady. And she's out in her pirogue, her wooden canoe. This picture is at Rock and Bowl, which is we'll go there one night, and we usually try to go there on Zydeco night, so we'll go so you guys can dance to some Zydeco with some country boys. Another term would be Creole. Now, Creole is oftentimes taken as a racial thing, and it can mean that, but it really is more of a cultural term. But basically, we're talking about a mix of cultures. So Spanish folks, French folks, African folks, Native Americans, all these folks kind of coming together. Creole is the mixed group. Again, it was initially used to distinguish Americans from non-Americans. And more broadly, it's someone that's not part of either parental lineage. So can't hang out with the whites because you're not all white. Can't hang out with the blacks because you're not all black. So it's this kind of in between classic American type of thing. Creole music is dominated by slave songs, Congo Square, which we'll talk about in a little bit, and then of course jazz. So jazz comes out of the Creole traditions. Their food, also a lot of rice. Really, really big. When Michael asks, you guys got to answer correctly. So what's the Holy Trinity, right? In Christianity, Catholicism, it's the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. In Creole cooking, it's celery, bell peppers, and onions. That's in almost everything, right? So it's the Holy Trinity. It's always in there, or almost always in there. Okra is also really a big, important part of this. This is this plant from West Africa that the slaves brought with them, and it can be a thickening agent, right? So it's how we get, instead of runny soup, it's how we get a little more thicky stew-like soup. And we use okra to make gumbo. And there's like a zillion different types of gumbo. When you guys are there, going to have all super cool gumbo. So some of you guys are vegetarian, so we'll probably make a version of gumbo zare when we're at the cooking school. But there's all kinds of great. There's most good gumbo involves meat. Sorry, but it does. So there's all kinds of great gumbo. So the classic Creole dish is going to be a gumbo. All kinds of cuisine is where you guys will get to sample. Everybody want to have alligator because you just want to have alligator, so you guys will have that and just sort of get it over with. But alligator isn't bad per se, but it's nothing. It's just a thing. So all kinds of fantastic cuisine that you guys will get to sample and taste. Sometimes it'll be some cheap little thing by the side of the road. Sometimes it'll be in a nicer main dish or something, but all kinds of wonderful stuff. This is from a place called Coop's Place. There's the great Dr. John Lambrinos. One night when we were up way too late, and we decided we needed cake, and so we went into this place called Angel, and for some mysterious reason there was an In-N-Out sticker on the check that we could never really understand. But the classic Louisianan foods that you guys should all try when we're there include obviously gumbo, which we talked about, jambalaya, which is a rice-based dish, po' boys, that's a fancy name for submarine sandwich. I've heard many different stories as to the origin of where the po' boys come from. One is that there was a streetcar strike, and these were the food that they used to serve the striking railmen, but whatever. Anyway, it's basically a submarine sandwich. Again, all kinds of fantastic types of po' boys. There's shrimp po' boys that Angie can't have any of. And there's like roast beef po' boys and just vegetarian ones, all kinds of great stuff. Pralines or pralines, depending on how you want to say it, are essentially a sweet nut dish. Beignets, we talked about that. That's this fried donut that you usually have powdered sugar with. They're they're very similar to In-N-Out fries. You want to eat them. Well, I mean, they don't taste like In-N-Out, but I mean, you got to eat them when they're hot. You know what I'm saying? In-N-Out fries, you leave them for a half hour, you're like, what the hell is that? Same kind of thing. So you got to eat them quick and down them. They don't really, it doesn't stay well. So beignets, definitely have beignets. One of my favorite dishes, red beans and rice. So that's a classic dish you have on a Monday. You can have it, and people make it whenever, but it's the classic dish that's made on a Monday. Crawfish, we'll have a crawfish boil at Foster's place. So crayfish, crawfish, same thing. We're talking about the Louisiana red crawfish. These are an invasive species here in California, but in Louisiana they're a native part of the ecosystem. Very popular thing. We'll boil them up, and they'll be while they aren't hot, the preparation you usually make with them is very hot. So it's good to clean out your nose and stuff if you have a runny nose or something like that. In general, seafood, very very big seafood. So we eat a lot. We eat a ton of seafood in California. The only people that eat more seafood than we per capita are the Hawaiians and the Louisianans. So those guys eat tons. So when we were doing a survey in the wake of the Refugio spill, some of the cleanup crews were brought in to deal with the spill a couple of years ago were from Louisiana because they know a lot about oil spills, unfortunately. And so one of our students was surveying one of these guys that a supervisor, and he filled this stuff out. And the students came back and it said, how many ounces of seafood have you eaten the last week or something like that, right? Isn't that the question?
Yeah.
And so the student's like, oh, I think you misfilled this out. He said, so normally people say 6 ounces, 7 ounces, a pound or something like that. This guy said 50 pounds. And she was like, I think you didn't mean pounds, did you? He goes, yeah, no, I meant 50 pounds. She's like, 50 pounds of seafood? Yeah, I meant 50 pounds of seafood. And they're like, okay. So a lot of seafood. And then in general, food tends towards the hot and the spicy side. If you guys aren't a big spicy person, that's okay. Most of the stuff you can get less mild or whatever. If you do accidentally get a little too much spicy, don't drink water. Definitely don't drink soda. You want to drink milk. You want to drink some milk, and that'll help cut the hotness. And then all kinds of really cool visual art. And we'll see this throughout our trip. But just like we have awesome musical culture, just like we have awesome culinary culture, we have awesome visual culture. So our friend Harry Shearer calls New Orleans, and many people call it, the northernmost port of the Caribbean. I say it's not really the United States. It's this sort of other thing. It's this reach of the Caribbean diaspora reaching up. So typically really vibrant colors. If somebody painted a house next to me bright purple, I would go, that's cool. My neighbors go, what the hell is that? In Louisiana, kind of, if you don't do that, people think you're a little boring, right? So an embracing of vibrancy, vibrant culture, a lot of really bright colors with contrasting color palettes, that kind of stuff. This is just random dude, and I was talking to in Jackson Square one day. He made a lemon alligator for my son. And all kinds of wonderful. So there's wonderful street art like that last picture. There's wonderful more higher end art, more expensive art in the galleries. Whatever you guys like, fantastic place for you guys to buy gifts, right? For you or for your significant other or for mom and dad or whatever. This is Gallery 940, and there's a gazillion awesome art galleries that are really fun to go check out. And while there are awesome art galleries in many places in the world, here you can sort of walk just into a ton really, really easily right next door to each other. And just a couple more examples to close off with some of that vibrancy of color and oftentimes irreverent stuff. So this would be maybe more a sort of what looks to be more like a mainstream type of piece of art. But if we look close, we have some monkeys hanging down. They're screwing around with Bourbon Street. Again, you guys probably shouldn't go to Bourbon Street. Bourbon Street sucks. You should go to better places. But but all this stuff. This is a series that artists were doing for a while. So this is what's called a Katrina door. This was a door on a damaged house, and these guys went and they collected these doors and they painted the doors. So all this the red here and the yellow, that's all painted on top of the door. You can see the door handle is right here. Here's the lock, but this was left. So this is what people call a Katrina X. This isn't a Katrina X. This is a disaster response X. So there are fewer and fewer every year because people have cleaned everything up. But we'll see these in museums. You'll see these in pictures and documentaries. This is what the first responders do when they're going door to door to make sure everybody's okay. So this is a standard international thing now. So there's a gazillion houses. How do you know if you've checked them all? Well, you go and you spray. The responders have a spray can, and at the entrance, or sometimes on the side wall, if they can't find the entrance, they'll make a big X. And each of the quadrants refers to something differently. So this is the date that it was checked. So this door was checked on September 2nd. This is the crew that did the checking. So it's probably Florida 1. It's probably an EMS crew or a disaster rescue crew from Florida, probably. This is the number of dead people inside. And then if there was any hazards, like a flowing gas main or something like that, that would also be indicated on another quadrant. Some of the places, because people initially came through really, really quick and were like, hey, anybody here? Anybody alive? Anybody, blah, 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 blah. And there, again, this whole city was flooded, right? So we had 80% of the city was flooded at one point. So we had to get to everywhere. So in some cases, you'll see 2 or every once in a while even 3 X's on a building because people came through, they did a quick look, but they weren't sure, right? So they wanted to come back and see if there are any dead bodies and things like that. So a very visceral response of the devastation that came in the wake of Katrina, and something that's a very powerful memory and invocation for folks that experienced that horrible disaster. So that's a little bit about that's my quick and dirty intro to Louisiana culture, New Orleans culture.